This is the Lessons in Positivity Videocast. Here's your host, Scott Peterson.
Hello again from the Positive Athlete Studios in Atlanta, Georgia. Today, our guest is Major League Baseball pitcher Tyler Beede. Tyler was selected in the first round of the draft out of high school by the Toronto Blue Jays and turned down a $2 million signing bonus so that he could pursue his education at Vanderbilt. Can you imagine turning down $2 million? But he bet on himself, and he was selected in the first round again by the San Francisco Giants a few years later. Tyler talks about that decision, as well as several ups and downs he had which could have jeopardized that decision in this week's Lessons in Positivity. We're joined by the San Francisco Giants pitcher and College World Series champion when he was at Vanderbilt and really a first-round pick of the San Francisco Giants, Tyler Beede. Tyler, welcome to the show.
Yeah, Scott, thanks for having me on. This will be a blast.
Hey, we know about the Giants, but a lot of people forgot that when you were coming out of high school, you were actually the first-round pick of the Toronto Blue Jays. And you had to kind of make a decision at that time. I mean, when somebody waves $2 million around in front of you, that's got to be a tough decision. Talk about the decision-making process of something like that.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, it was a very difficult decision and one that I really needed to lean on my inner circle a lot during that period of time, both with my mom and dad and their opinions of what was the right thing to do. And then also guys like Eric Cressy, Eric Averill, guys who I trust as my inner circle till this day. Because as a kid at that age, I was 17, and I felt I was polished enough to play pro ball. I felt that I was mentally mature and ready and capable to start my minor league career and make my way to the big leagues. And so both those kind of aspects of my decision on top of the money, which, I didn't come from a wealthy family. We struggled to make ends meet. My parents were divorced when I was younger, and my dad oftentimes sacrificed essentially all the money that he would make in his business through, he ran a gym. We would basically travel together each summer, and he would basically spend everything that he earned for me to go play and travel and play against kids of higher levels, and for me to develop my talent and play in front of these scouts, because in Massachusetts, where I grew up, we didn't necessarily have the exposure and resources that those other kids had. So I say that to say, when I was coming to make that decision, all these things were really on the table for me, on top of understanding the importance of education and the degree that I would earn from Vanderbilt and the value that carries in the world today, and that it would carry to me and my family. And so, all that was on the table and presented to me, I needed to understand that Vanderbilt was the best place for 17-year-old Tyler Beede to be, because I still had, in hindsight, a lot to learn, a lot to grow, a lot of ways to grow and improve mentally, spiritually, and athletically. And so, it was difficult. And to say no to that amount of money, it really showed, I think, who, that I was closest to was really a true friend and in my inner circle, because there were a lot of people who thought I was crazy. And even I, at times thought I was crazy, but it was a decision that I would go back and make the same 100 out of 100 times.
That's good to hear. And you grew up in Massachusetts, where there's a limited amount of time that baseball can be played. Do you think that there are a lot of cold weather kids watching this today and probably thinking the same thing? Those kids down in the South, they can play year round. Did you ever feel like that was a tremendous disadvantage to you?
Originally, I did, yeah, because I loved the game of baseball so much. I wanted to play as long as I could, but we'd be shoveling off the field for tryouts in March and starting like the first week of April. And I thought, man, especially where I live in Texas now, my father-in-law is a high school baseball coach, and they're playing in January, February, some inter squads and practices. And so I felt like I was missing out maybe on some development early on, but what was so valuable to a guy like Tim Corbin at Vanderbilt was the fact that we had fresh arms and that we weren't being used as much as kids who were playing year round. And now to say, like, you're playing year round, that's not a disadvantage as long as you get proper rest and have a couple months off to let your arm recover. But kids in Massachusetts and the Northeast in general, they had maybe more fresh arms because they weren't pitching as many innings. So that was also sort of an added desire for me during the summers to not stay around and play some like local Babe Ruth leagues or travel ball leagues where I wouldn't pitch a lot, but go and play in Georgia and California and Florida and really ramp up some innings, not just innings, but high exposure innings to kids with a lot of talent to see where I needed to improve. So Corbs loved the fact that we were from the Northeast, and that we had fresh arms. So I always tell kids, don't worry about where you're from. Just make sure that when you're getting your reps in, that they're quality reps.
Yeah, so you had those quality reps, and you were so close to making the USA 18U team, but didn't quite make it. And Eric Cressy told me that was a turning point for you, just in terms of maybe your desire to play. Like you could have gone the way of saying, all right, they don't think I'm good enough, to, all right, I'm going to show them how good I am. And you chose the latter.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny you bring that up. I think my dad, Eric, there's so many people who played an integral part in my development, and they put me in these situations where it was either that decision of saying, oh, I'm not that good. I'm going to kind of be content with where I'm at, do good in high school in this area. But also the other side of it is this could motivate you to improve. And that was one of those situations where I really felt motivated and driven to get better and say, I did well, and I maybe feel like I deserved to make that team, but I wasn't quite where they, needed me to be on that team. And so, I'm going to put my head down. I'm going to get back to Cressy's. I'm going to work out maybe a little bit harder than I was before, because now I know what I need to do. I'm going to focus on my throwing program a little bit more to get a little stronger, to throw a little harder, because my stuff was good, but I wasn't throwing hard enough. And that's what it motivated me to do. And I was thankful that I had Cressy and that resource and that gym and those groups of kids to push me to get better, because that was huge for me. It's one thing to make the decision to get better, but it's another thing to really buy in and trust those people around you to help you grow and improve. And Eric certainly was one of those guys during that period of time.
So you get through that, and you're a number one pick, and you turn that down to go play at Vanderbilt. What were some of the decisions on why you went to Vanderbilt, and talk about that whole relationship with scouts and relationships with other colleges that were recruiting to you? How did you break that down in your mind in terms of making that kind of a decision?
Yeah, I think for me and my family, it was most importantly about academics at the time. And so obviously understanding the way that Vanderbilt was doing on the baseball field, you had guys like David Price and Sonny Gray, Pedro Alvarez. The list goes on of guys who proved that program was successfully athletically. And then to see the way that their academics were so prestigious and so challenging and rewarding as well. I wanted to combine, my decision, understanding that I can both capitalize on getting a really good education. So really Vanderbilt stood out to me in a lot of ways, and they separated themselves from the pack. I was deciding between there, Virginia, and USC, and USC was too far from my mom, so decided to go to Nashville. But Tim Corbin really was probably the major decision maker for me. Like the way that Corbs presented the decision and the opportunity to come to Vanderbilt, he made it seem like the perfect fit for me, and he cared for me and my family and my development, and he laid out things on the baseball front that would be an opportunity for me, but more so off the field, and understanding how I would grow, the things that he would teach me from a leadership traits perspective, developing my mind and my body as well. These are things that he really cares for and he looks to improve in guys. And so I really valued that when he sat down with me before I was making those decisions. And so really it was a no-brainer for me after I sat down with Corbs.
So you go to Vanderbilt and you have you get your feet wet first year, get some innings in, and get a chance to play on the big stage. The next year you go out and absolutely kill it. I mean, you went like 14-1 or something like that one time, and you're up for the Golden Spikes and all of these things. The following year you don't have as good a statistical year. So talk about the differences between those 2 years, and talk about what you learned from having that just ridiculous success, in your sophomore year, and then your junior year, feeling maybe like, wow, what happened? Am I missing something, or were scouts saying, are you missing something?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I felt like I was sort of invincible my sophomore year. I won 14 consecutive games, and I was so superstitious, man. I was doing things like wouldn't change up my routine at all. And I think the biggest thing that stood out to me is that I was being Tyler Beede through and through, and didn't matter when I took them out. I wasn't worrying about impressing anyone. I just wanted to go out and compete. and put my team in positions to win, as cliche as that sounds. We had such a good team. We went 26-3 that year in the SEC. So my record was indicative of the talent that we had around me. And not to say that my junior year we didn't, but I was so focused on being someone for someone. So I was wanting to be somebody that was a top round draft pick for all these scouts that showed up. I was, there were times where I was focused on, pitching well for the team. And that's not to say that I didn't want to go out there and compete for them. I just really was, at the end of the day, putting too much thought into being drafted high and being in a good position to get drafted high. And so I really wasn't focused and engaged in my role on the team. And I was a good teammate. I still supported my guys, but looking back on it, man, I was so wrapped up in the outcome. If I had a good game, I was a good guy to be around. If I had a bad game, you probably didn't want to be around me. And my family was usually at a lot of those games, and we'd go out to dinner, and I'd be in a bad mood. And looking back at it, for me, what stood out is that baseball was my identity. And so I essentially was wrapped up in everything that was happening, from the results to my emotions, to what was going to happen in the future, so much doubt and anxiety. And so that was actually a tough period of time for me in my walk, in my life. And even though good things were happening on the exterior, I got drafted again, and we ended up going on to win the College World Series. I just was not in a good place mentally. I was so wrapped up in being this baseball player, this good baseball player that people looked at and said, he made the right decision to go to college and get drafted again. I was worried about all those things. In my sophomore year, I was just trying to be Tyler Beede and be a good teammate and be competitive for the team.
Yeah, I was going to say, did anything have to do, were you in your sophomore year, were you the Friday night starter, or were you the Friday night or Saturday or Friday night in your junior year? Did any of that change in terms of maybe the level you were put on?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, so I was the Saturday guy my sophomore year, and then I was the Friday guy as a junior my junior year. But we had Walker Buehler, who was the Sunday guy, and Carson Fulmer was the Saturday guy. And so honestly, those two kids as sophomores, they were more reliable for the team than me. I was up and down. I'd have a really great start, I'd have a bad start. And yet those two guys were steady Eddie, man. They were, our team motto was pick each other up, and they would pick me up if I had a rough Friday night and go on to win the rest of the weekend. And so, yeah, I may have felt a little bit more pressure to set the tone, which I enjoyed. I always loved being the Friday night guy, and always enjoyed still pitching on Friday nights in pro ball. But yeah, I think I felt a little bit more pressure. I was notorious for just putting a ton of pressure on myself, having high expectations, which I still do, but now I have high expectations for things that I can control. A lot within the game of baseball, you just can't control. Once you let go of the ball, there's going to be things that happen. Ball bounces your way, maybe it doesn't. But it's all an opportunity for you to learn and grow. And I think I was really not having that same mindset my junior year.
Yeah, you talk about other things out of your control, and you just experienced another one, in terms of choosing to do the Tommy John surgery and being out for this year, although you may have picked the perfect year to do it if no baseball gets going. But right. The fact of the matter is that, you're that's one of those things where you come out of spring training and you were firing, man. I mean, you were doing really well. So there had to be some disappointment in thinking, man, I've got to give up a year here before I can get back. So talk about your emotions in that, and how are you kind of compartmentalizing all of those kinds of things?
Yeah, it's a good question. I put myself back in that moment, and I was disappointed and I was angry. And, at the time I thought, it's not right to feel this way. I've certainly been blessed with a lot in my life and in my journey. I was just appreciative that I was at, that place and pitching the way I was. But I did give myself 24 hours of feeling down, because we work so hard as baseball players and as athletes in general in the off season to get our bodies in shape and ready. And then in a matter of, days or pitches, you can be potentially out for 12 to 15 months. And so, I was down. But then, just as I worked through the decision as a man of faith and a Christian and a believer, I knew it was an opportunity to trust God, and the fact that I would have an opportunity to rehab and get my body right, but more than that, to get my mind right, and to grow closer to God through this experience. Because now there's not a day go by where I can't where I have to rely and depend on God to strengthen me and give me the ability to look at this with a positive and optimistic perspective. Because there's difficult days, there's difficult weeks where my arm doesn't feel great. I don't feel like the rehab is progressing the way that I would like it to, and so this is all God's timing. My body's going to adapt the way that it's going to adapt. But it's been a great opportunity for me to step back. And yeah, the things that are going on in the world today, there's so much uncertainty, and I'm not insensitive to what's going on in the world. And so I try not to look at what I'm going through as sort of the most important thing in the world right now. But I know that it takes a lot of focus and thinking about the right things. And for me, spending time and quality time with other believers and in fellowship has really allowed me to understand the importance of what I'm going through to grow closer to the Lord.
So is that kind of the advice you give to some kids that are, because some of these kids are getting Tommy John now in high school, or they're going to get it at some point, and it could be just another kind of an injury. It doesn't have to be TJ. So what would you tell a kid right now that either to prepare them for the inevitably getting some kind of an injury that might, or just if they've got it and they're trying to rehab right now, what kind of a encouragement would you give them?
I always tell kids, focus on the present moment. I think when you have a surgery that is going to delay you from game action for 12 months plus, even 8 to 12 months, it's so easy to think about that back end and say, okay, I need to be at a specific spot and be feeling this way by this month. You really need to take it day by day and week by week and understand that everybody's body is going to adapt differently. Some days you're going to have to take a step back. Other days you're going to be taking 2 steps forward. It's just about taking things in stride and being malleable, being able to adapt to what you're going through. And everything is for a purpose. I think you need to attack each day to get better, but also understand that getting better may sometimes mean doing less and being smart about what you're doing. But to also take this time and use it to your advantage to get things maybe right nutritionally. Focus on the way that you're eating and treating your body, creating better habits, maybe better movement patterns. And when I talk about Eric Cressy, he's done a great job of showing me where maybe my movement patterns have been falling short, and that's maybe what led to my injury. And so I tell kids to look into, how did you get hurt? Why did you get hurt? Is it something that's lacking in the way that your body is moving? And so as an athlete, what's most important is having awareness of what you're doing, the way that you're doing things and why you're doing things. I tell kids at a young age, those middle school, high schoolers, man, learn your process and learn routines that work for you. And I think if you're going through a rehab, an injury, it's a perfect time to say, okay, that was working for me, I'm going to stick to that. Or that maybe seems to be throwing me off, I'm going to take that out of my routine and see what works for it. So like I said, man, you work on things nutritionally, maybe spiritually, physically and mentally. You really got to make sure that you have your mind in the right place, because when we get back from injury, there may be some doubts, there may be some hesitation. So we need to be strong and convicted in what we're doing. Long-winded answer, but I just feel so passionate about rehab and how positive of an experience it can be.
Yeah, and Tommy John surgery isn't what I'll call the death sentence it used to be a long time ago. There are some teams drafting players or trading for players because they've already had it, and maybe that their arms are coming back a little stronger. And those kind of attitudes, a kid thinks, okay, I get this, and now the schools aren't going to be, interested in me and those kind of things. But there are other reasons that we were talking about Coach Corbin and some of the things he was watching as a scout, scouting kids as to whether he was going to pick them or not, and a lot of things he looked at that kids just think they're talking about your results and those kinds of things, but it's not always the case, is it?
No, it's not, and that's a good point. I think we put so much stock into how you do on the field, which carries a level of importance, but the way that you treat your teammates, how do you interact with guys? Maybe if you're not pitching as many innings and you're on your summer ball circuit, and don't think that those scouts or those college coaches aren't looking at the way that you interact with your teammates. And I've heard it a million times, the fact that maybe the way that you interact with your parents between games, during the game, Ma, can you go get me a Gatorade? I'm thirsty. Doesn't say thank you. Who knows what coach is standing right there, by the fences or by the dugout, hears that and says, man, that kid, he doesn't have a level of gratitude for his parents or things of that nature. So it's not to say to be on guard and to walk on eggshells and think you need to be perfect. I think coaches understand that as a younger player, you have room for improvement and growth, but it's to understand that coaches are always watching. They're paying attention to the details. How are you playing catch before the game? A kid has a big strikeout after you got taken out of the game and left the bases loaded. Are you going to go give him a high five and be pumped, or are you going to be, sad that you got taken out of the game? So in my experience, those have been things that I've had to work through and know that coaches are watching and paying attention to, and they put a ton of stock and value into it, determining whether they think that you're going to fit into their culture and their program.
You've mentioned a few times throughout this conversation that about your faith and about how important it is to you. When did that become something for you that you felt was more important, and maybe how you deal with things, or how do you look at faith in terms of your overall life, not just baseball?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think when I met my wife, which was in 2014, I was coming off of being drafted by the Giants in the first round and just winning the College World Series. And my wife grew up in Texas. She grew up in a Christian home, going to church. And I grew up sort of the opposite, sort of sports first, didn't go to church, and wasn't introduced to Jesus really until I was in college. And at that point, I had been drafted twice in the first round. We had won the College World Series. I had, been blessed to receive the signing bonus that I turned down in high school. And so from a worldly perspective, I had everything maybe that people would desire to have and to accomplish from a young age at that point. Yet I was still missing something. I still had this anxiety and this darkness in my life that I couldn't quite explain. And I always, would look myself in the mirror back then and say, you have all this stuff. Why are you still feeling like you're empty and you're missing something? And for me, it was my faith. It was Jesus, right? It was receiving the free gift of salvation and understanding that sacrifice that Jesus made for me and what that means for me going forward. And I was probably in a place where I needed, my wife to come into my life at that point. She was like the true embodiment of God's grace in my life. Like, she walked with me through things that I was struggling with. And as I was able to work these things out and understand, I was missing joy. I'd had happiness, but true joy was coming from the Lord in that time of my life. And so I got saved in 2014 at the end of the year, at the Increase Conference, the PAO Increase Conference in Atlanta. And from that point forward, I've just understood that baseball is my ministry, right? It's a place where I both am blessed with God's gifts and abilities for me to go play baseball and to compete and be the best that I can be for God's glory, right? It's not to be the best that's ever played the game for worldly recognition, to be in the Hall of Fame. All that is great if it provides you the platform to glorify God, but I'm here to share Jesus with guys, and I'm here to compete, to do it in a way that God partners with me through my work and through baseball, so that I can show guys, this is what God's blessed me to do. I'm going to do and work hard with the things that he's blessed me with to glorify him. But this isn't who I am. I'm not a baseball player. I'm Tyler Beede, and I'm a believer in Christ. And I just felt so passionate about that since 2014. And it's really brought me a long way. I've overcome some things in baseball and off the field that no doubt point to God and his redeeming work through me. So certainly thankful to be able to share all those things as I continue to play baseball.
Tyler, thanks for sharing that perspective, and I'm sure there's going to be tons of people who will absolutely love to hear that message. And you have something I wanted also to ask you about is your podcast. You started a podcast, and so what are you talking about on your podcast?
Yeah, it's awesome. My dad and brother and I decided sort of in the middle of quarantine to start the podcast. It's called Glove Talk Podcast. It's a mountain visit with the Beedes. And we just started, we've released our third one today with Brett Saberhagen. And it's been great. We really just desire to share insights and stories in the game of baseball through people who have impacted the game the most. And that doesn't limit us from just players. We want to hear from fans, guys like Cressy, in the strength and conditioning world, nutritionists, people in your world as well who are trying to positively impact youth baseball players coming up. And we just want to provide them, those resources and how to navigate certain processes that baseball brings about through, deciding to go to a college summer camp or deciding which school to go to, the agent process and financial advisor process. There's so many things that are so clouded, and they're difficult decisions. And so we just hope to shed some light into that through our knowledge of baseball. And it's been fun to be able to talk with my dad and brother, because my dad's in Massachusetts. My brother actually doesn't live too far from me here in Texas. But for us to be have that communication and to talk baseball, that's what we love most. And so we're excited for other people to hear that as well.
How can they go about hearing it? Where will they find it?
Yeah, so we're on Spotify and iTunes, Glove Talk Podcast. We also are on Instagram and Twitter for posting updates for people as well. So that's where you can find us, and we're posting regularly about sort of some audiograms that we've done, and then we post our podcasts every Thursday morning on those two outlets.
Well, that is a must for all the baseball players, and as a baseball fan myself, I'm jumping in on that. We've had a good chance to talk to you this afternoon, and Tyler, thanks so much for everything you shared today and taking the time to give your thoughts to kids. All of these are pieces and parts that are going to really help them, and so I can't thank you enough for spending the time and giving the great detailed answers you have.
Yeah, you got it, Scott. I appreciate what you guys are doing, and I know that you're making a positive impact, no doubt, with what you guys are doing. So I appreciate you letting me be a part of it and share some of my stories today.
Thanks, Tyler.
You got it, Scott. Appreciate you.
I'm sure this episode has created a whole new group of Tyler Beede fans around the country. What a great story and belief of himself, his faith, and how a positive attitude can serve you well in all that you do. If you would like to watch some of our previous videocasts, they're all available in the videos section of our website at positiveathlete.org. And if you're interested in reading inspirational stories of high school positive athletes, we'd love for you to check out our new book, The Positive Athlete, 100 Inspirational Stories of High School Student Athletes. You can purchase this book on our website, which again is positiveathlete.org. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time on Lessons in Positivity.